Okay, well, as everyone's joining, good morning or good afternoon or good evening, depending on where you are joining us from. I am Robin Anselmi, President of Global Consulting Services for Conversant, and we're thrilled to have you. This is our third edition of Community Conversations, and this has been an experiment. So we have been learning as we're going, and we're going to try something just slightly different today for those of you who have been with us on the previous ones. So there's two things that are just slightly different about today. Today's topic is presence amidst the chaos. And so given that this is about presence, we've been having an internal debate about whether or not the chat is helpful to keep us present or distracting. And so we've had this as a lively conversation this week. I'm going to make this offer. For those of you who find the chat to be distracting, please keep it off. You don't have to have it on. You don't have to have that window open. You can have that turned off. So for those of you who find the chat to be distracting, that's the choice for you. For those of you who find it as a really great way to engage, or it helps to keep your attention focused, or you like being in the conversation with us, please feel free to continue to use it, because this is meant to be a conversation and a dialogue. And the only way in this technology for us to do that is for you to be able to engage with the chat. So we're giving you some options this week about how to use that and how to actually experience being present. Which brings me to the second point about some things we're going to try this week. We actually, because this is about presence and we want to be as practical as possible, we're actually going to try some collective exercises. And we'll be interested to see what that's like for all of us. So to start that, my dear friend and colleague, Richard McDonald, will you lead us through a brief presence practice?
Yes, of course. Welcome everybody, and thanks for making time. Certainly are times of chaos, and what we want to do is see just if we were to sit still for 1 minute, an opportunity for you to notice for yourself if you're distracted, if you can settle in. So you could do this with your eyes open, your eyes closed. Just some simple instructions. Make sure your body is in a way that you feel comfortable, that breathing is easy. And again, either your eyes open, your eyes closed. I'll watch time. And for now, I'm going to recommend as you settle in with your spine straight, shoulders roll back and down, that you just observe and notice the miracle of your own breathing. So nothing else to do, just observe and notice the breathing. I'll close my eyes and set the timer for 1 minute. I'll see you on the other side. And then if your eyes were closed and you would like to open them, please feel free to do that. And just curious for you just to self-reflect, was that a long minute? Was that a short minute?
Thanks, Richard.
You're welcome.
I'm guessing for many, that's probably a slightly unusual experience to join and be there for a full minute of quiet. So if there's anything you've noticed, we'd love to know what that is in the chat. As you're doing that, I'd like to just make some introductions. Our colleague Kel Delaney's with us this week. He's going to be monitoring the chat for us so that we can be in the conversation. He'll be paying attention to those of you who say smart things that we think should be in the broader conversation or who raise questions. Kel, do you want to just say hello?
Hello, everyone. For the most part, I'll be quiet on this call, except for in the chat. So as Robin said, feel free to ask me any questions, post stuff there. Even if we can't get to it now, it's always stuff that we can come back to in future calls.
And Roger, will you introduce yourself, please?
Hi, everybody. From Boulder, Colorado today. I hope you're all doing well and welcome.
Great. And Richard McDonald, you already sort of spoke. Do you just want to say where you're calling from today?
Sure, I'm calling from the big state of Texas.
Great, thank you. So the conversation today is about presence amidst chaos. And I thought a really great place for us to start is, what does it mean to be present? So when we say that, what do we mean by it and why does it matter? Richard, Roger, who wants to answer that?
I'll jump in. For me, what is presence and why does it matter? What I like to think of it as is kind of a real-time, moment-to-moment self-awareness. Kind of an eye on how I'm thinking, how I'm feeling, how I'm showing up in the world. And sometimes self-awareness is described as, well, what are your strengths and weaknesses, and have an awareness of that. And this is a little different. It's kind of this moment-to-moment understanding of what's happening with myself. And why is that important? In general, why it's important is I believe that we're leading from what we're feeling. And so how we're feeling has a lot to do with how we show up. And as leaders, which whether that's a formal capacity or if it's a leader in our family or just the environment around, our feelings are leading us. So therefore we're having an impact on everybody else. And it's super important right now because we're noticing that everybody is stirred up. We're all stirred up right now. And so the more present we are, the more choices we have.
Nice, Roger. Well, you know, we're certainly been exploring this territory for years as a community and individually, and we bring our thoughts and our experiences back, and we keep evolving the answer to the question, what is presence? Something that I found interesting, Roger, to build on what you were saying is that we say you're always present. The question is, are you aware of what you're present to? And those of you that have worked with us in the past know that we talk about being purposeful. And so we put purposeful presence together. Am I actually, to Roger's point, aware of what's happening inside of me? What's my internal state? Because if I'm not aware of that, I'm going to have a big impact in terms of my choices as my actions. And sometimes I find for myself, and some of you in the chat, I think, had said that you felt discomfort, you felt tension. So I noticed for myself that being present actually requires a generosity with myself. But it is the starting point. So that's my thoughts.
Richard or Roger, one of you, can you also just expand a little? Because when we talk about being purposefully present, there are 3 things we're paying attention to. Will one of you just name those 3? Because I think this becomes critically important for many of us, because I think there's a lot of us that only pay attention to one of the 3.
I'd happily jump into that. So the 3 aspects of purposeful presence are our cognition, our what's happening cognitively to us, our emotions, and then physically what's happening. And we see those as all 3 interconnected. And to your point of, we often pay attention to maybe just one of them. I think most of us live in our minds a lot. So what's happening with us cognitively? So that's why this question of what are we feeling is kind of an unusual one in the general world.
Yeah, Roger, sort of building on that, you know, when we say what are we feeling, there's the physical sensations we always can be aware of, because that's one of the ways we know that we're present, is that we feel ourselves physically. what I notice is when I'm thinking a lot, oftentimes that takes me away from being present. I don't know how many of you have had the moment with a significant other that says, are you really present? I'd like you to be more present because I'm still winding down from my day, or I'm preoccupied with a worry. And one of the things that we know is that with our thinking, if we're not really aware of how we're using that cognitive piece, we could be stuck in the past with some kind of resentment, perhaps, if it's a negative thought of the past. Or especially today, how does my mind churn and create a future of anxiety because I'm projecting out my worries? We like to say that the beginning of presence is really acknowledging and accepting what is. And I love this idea of the three ways that we can notice what is. So cognitively, what is the quality of my thinking? And am I caught in a habitual way of thinking? What is an emotional state I'm in? Is it a habitual state of worry, perhaps? And physically, am I holding tension in my body? Or can I just take a moment and notice, my breathing got shallow. And then that naturally will allow the breathing to settle and engage the parasympathetic nervous system, which allows us to be much more coherent and resourced and resilient to handle the challenges. So we think of these three, we separate them just for a moment as pathways in to both notice when we are off center and as channels to help us get back to center.
Richard, you're making me remember an old worksheet I used to have. It was a little picture of a person, like a little stick figure, and it had a triangle. So the triangle was kind of a vertical axis of cognition to emotion, and then pointing out to action. So thinking, feeling, action, or cognitive, emotional, physical. And I'd set that aside, and moments during the day I'd go over and try to answer what's happening in each of those, maybe a bullet or two for each, to raise my awareness in the areas that I'm not focused on.
Well, one of the reasons I think that becomes so incredibly important, both right now today, but also for all of us as leaders, is how often do we bring with us the emotion from the last meeting to the next meeting, right? And so now there's a whole new group of people that were not in that last conversation, that probably don't deserve whatever emotive thing I may be putting forward, right? My annoyance or frustration that I carried, and now I bring that with me, right? And so Richard, I think this point around like what's actually happening now, and am I actually being connected to that, or am I actually bringing with me anxiety or frustration from the past, or worry from the future, right? So all of those I think can actually impact us. And so how do I actually get really grounded right here? Roger, I'm curious for you, what are some things that you would offer around how do we get curious and actually say, like, what's happening now? What would you offer to people practically about that?
That's a great question. So this little worksheet idea is one thing. You lay it out and actually ask yourself, what am I feeling? What is happening right now with me? Behind that is naming that condition that's happening with us. So for me, where Richard went earlier is a great way, which is what sensations am I feeling right now? And often I'll say, okay, I'll scan my body and find, is there any place that is currently concentrated energy? So I could say, like right now, I feel more pressure on my right sit bone. And just starting with any sensation, what we observe starts to change. And then I think what else is really great in that triad of cognitive, emotional, and physical is just hitting each one of them. I'll just invite people to do this right now. Bring your attention to your body. Just any part of your experience. And maybe now focus it to your shoulders. And what I'm noticing as I do that is I'm a little bit contracted right now, right? And just noticing that it starts to change because I go, I don't really want to be in that condition. So I start going, I want to open up, right? Because I happen to know that being open, I'm a better performer. So bringing attention to my sensations in my body is probably the easiest one to start with.
Great.
Yeah.
I love that. Richard, I'm wondering about when you start to notice it, what would you tell people to do? And I'm thinking about the story of our clients leaving the one meeting and going to the other. Would you tell that story?
Well, this is such a beautiful example of the practicality. I saw in the chat, so someone was asking about, how do you help someone who hasn't had these practices better take them on or see the value in them. Well, one of our clients, a very important client working with the Defense Force, had their team in one room. They crossed the passage, and then they were addressing and being addressed by the Department of Defense. And the reaction from the client, the customer, was not good. And these guys were pretty shocked. And they had to go back across the corridor to speak to their team about what had just happened, the feedback. And there were 3 of them, as I remember the story. And they had all been through one of our credibility, influence, and impact programs, the 8-month program we do. And one of them said, stop. And these were 3 gentlemen, senior folks in the company. They stopped. They said, we cannot afford to take our mood, kind of like a virus, I suppose, into this other room and pollute our folks with our emotional reactivity based on the feedback we got. So these guys just stopped the practices that we do and will continue to suggest. We'll have some offerings after this program. Unlock their knees, relax their knees. Somebody guided them through the 20-second, 30-second breathing, looked at each other, reconnected to their purpose, and stepped back into that room with poise, and were able to accurately communicate the feedback without the emotional baggage. I get goosebumps just thinking of that right now, and how many moments as leaders, whether you're a designated leader and just wanting to be a leader in any given moment, do we have the opportunity to catch our bioreaction, the conditioned tendency, pause, remind ourselves of our purpose, and make sure that we are coherent with that when we engage with the people that we're wanting to influence. So it's a great story.
It's a great story. And I think it really highlights the things we've been talking about. So one is the catching it, like just noticing it, being able to name it for themselves, like this mood of anxiety, like we're all feeling that. Now, what do we want to shift to, right? Which I think is sort of the next part of this conversation, right? Is around part of the reason this is such a critically important skill right now is it really, what we're present to influences the choices we're about to make. Roger, will you add a little to that?
Yeah, what's coming to my mind is a meeting I was in just yesterday with some clients, and it was a person in Europe and another guy in Asia, and we started the call, and we started just to jump into the agenda, and I had enough awareness in that moment to say, why don't we pause and just check in real quick? And I asked people, how you doing? And one of the gentlemen said, he paused and he kind of gulped and he said, I'm actually scared. I'm actually scared. And he was talking about the coronavirus and all that was surrounding it in his environment. And so what it allowed us to do is spend a few moments exploring how we're each feeling, naming that. And then we said, okay, well, what do we want to make sure we accomplish in this call? And that allowed us to create an intention. And so what I loved about it is we named what we started with what was actually present. And then we said, okay, now with that in mind, what do we want to do? Now, we could have chose something different, but we went back to the agenda. We said it was important, but we named that thing that would have been going on in the background for him and probably us too, the whole time. And that allowed him to connect better with us and us with him as well.
Well, I think today, and again, this is presence amidst the chaos, which I think is a fair description of the world right now for many, if not all of us, is that we are having sort of a low level fever of fear, I think, for many of us, right? And so this is an opportunity to really make some choices about, do we want to stand in the fear as we lead? Do we want to stand in the fear as we make really critical decisions? Or is there someplace else we want to stand? So it actually gives us an opportunity to make better decisions around where do we want to lead from? And where are we trying to move people? Where are we trying to get to from a really purposeful place? And I think without that, it's so easy to just get up in the morning and go running into our day, and whatever happens, happens. We let the chips fall where they may, and then we turn around and go, gosh, there's a lot of debris behind me. How did that happen?
Robin, I don't know many people that when they say they're afraid or they're angry and you ask them the question, do you want to lead from that? I don't know many that will say, yeah, that's actually the mood I want to lead from.
Yeah.
So I love it.
Yeah, you know, as I'm listening to this conversation and imagining, I'm looking at my little green light and I'm imagining people that I might know and people that I don't know. It's like, so what we're proposing here for me as a sort of a summary synopsis, not that we're completing the call, but we're referring to something called presence. We're saying that you cannot not be present. What we're suggesting is, what are you choosing to be present to? So in these moments, Robin, that you were referring to, and Roger, I would say for all of us, the practice now would be to write a purpose statement for yourself. What's my purpose at this moment in life? What's my purpose for the company and businesses that I work with? And what's my purpose for my family if I'm in a family situation or with my friends? Simple, single line. What is it that I'm committing to or consecrating my life force to? This is definitely not a time to be tossed and thrown through reactivity. So take the moment to do that. And then in the presence practice, these three different ways we have windows into becoming more grounded. The first thing is to accept where we are. It's difficult to jump up if your feet aren't connected to the ground. Something that we know currently we can count on is gravity is available. We are always in gravity. So literally notice, like when Roger was speaking, am I collapsing or do I maintain dignity, verticality? And that comes from feeling where I'm standing, literally feeling where I'm standing in gravity. But it's also, where do I stand with regard to this issue, this challenge, and this problem? I think the greatest gift we can give ourselves and to society, to humanity, maybe if we want to go all the way out, is to be responsible for our presence, how purposeful we are, and not to buy into the reactivity. It isn't helpful. So whatever has worked for you, to find your central point from which you move, we need that. And we will be establishing, and I know Robin will say this, but we will be setting up 3 times a week practice sessions. So if this has been intriguing to you, we'll send more information. But I guess I want to make it that in some ways, it's not complicated. It's just, will we practice?
Yeah. You know, Richard, one of the things about that I think is really practical is the reality is life is going to throw us up in the air. Jim Matroni, I'm sure you're out there listening. This is one of your favorite things to say. Life is going to throw us up in the air. Today is a really good example of that, the world we find ourselves in, right? We have all been thrown up in the air a little. The question is, how do you choose to land? So when you find yourself thrown up in the air, how do you make a different choice? Roger, there's a presence activity that is maybe 30 seconds long that you do. Would you guide everyone through that? Because it's probably one of my favorite. I have found it to be, I think, the most practical and useful in moments when I do feel like the world has thrown me up in the air, when I can recall it. Will you lead everyone through that?
Yeah, I'd love to. This is a breathing exercise that has a little bit of a process to it. And then after that, then you let your breathing return to normal. And basically, it's where we let our exhale be longer than our inhale. So what I'll invite you to do, and you can do it right with me, and my hand will indicate inhale and exhale, is inhale for a count of 4 and exhale for a count of 6. We'll do that, let's say 4 times, and then I'll let our breathing return to normal. So if you would, find your center and inhale for a count of 4 and out for a count of 6. Now just let your breathing come back to normal.
I love that because it's always available to us. That particular exercise, breathing in for 4 and out for 6, you can do in any situation. That's the stress of driving in the car, or an 18-year-old who won't clean his room, or spouse who's annoyed with you for something, or a colleague who has just frustrated you. It works in all of those settings. Trust me, all of those I've tested in the recent past.
Robin, if I could just add very briefly, and even if you think that looks weird and you're on one of these Zoom calls, it's pretty normal just to turn off your video and let it happen then. You can come back and nobody has to see it.
And the breathing, most people won't notice anyway.
Right.
I am currently present to the time, which has come rapidly to a close. Richard or Roger, is there anything that you would like to add before we say goodbye to everybody?
I have something very simple: to remember that our starting point is always now, and accepting where we're starting from is most probably the most powerful way to take the next step purposefully.
Beautiful.
I'd just like to add please notice how you're feeling and decide if that's where you'd like to lead from.
That's great. Really quickly, Kel will put in the chat how to sign up for our newsletter. The other thing is that we will be offering a brief practice 3 times a week. We have been asked to do this for years. Some of you who have participated with us in our credibility, influence, and impact know this. You have been asking us for years, would we create a virtual presence practice of some kind? And we thought now there is no better time than now for us to do that. So you'll be getting an email about that you can sign up for. We would love for you to join us with whatever frequency you can. We think that more purposeful presence in the world right now is an antidote to the fear and chaos that we're all experiencing. On behalf of all of us, I just want to say thanks everybody for joining us again today. We're delighted by getting to be in these conversations with all of you, and we're grateful that you're here experimenting and playing with us. any feedback or thoughts you have for us, please send those along as well. We would be happy to integrate those as we go. So have a great rest of your day, wherever you might be calling from. And we will see you next week on next week's topic, I believe, is empathy, which should be a great segue from this week. So thanks all. Have a great day.
Thank you, everybody. Blessings. Be
Bye-bye.
safe.